All right. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, carried. Thank you very much for that. That's an interesting one. Now, Ross, Phil and Gary, come and give us some good news, please. We're on item 14, the Chief Executive Group Financial Officer, and Gary's occasional summing up of what the hell's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I note, firstly, that, or you will note, that we've got a fulsome report on performance for the 12 months to 30 June later in the agenda at item 14 and then at C1. So I won't duplicate too much here because it'll come up later. Suffice to say the results are broadly positive, and so if the call, Your Worship, is for good news, then that represents quite good reading in terms of the overall performance of the organisation. I also note that at the Performance and Appointments Committee this week, there was an end-of-year review for myself and by extension some key objectives that you have been seeking for the organisation through me. And for the councillors who aren't on that committee, I will circulate a summary table outside of this forum that gives you more detail in that regard. If I just focus on the last month, the key focus or the key areas that we've focused on, obviously the setup of the Auckland Future Fund, but there's an item on your agenda shortly and that will speak for itself. We've been bedding in the restructuring and driving a number of things in the organisation, obviously really getting ready organisationally for implementation of the outcomes and the changes coming out of the LTP, and emphasising a few things into the organisation around customer service and collaboration. For your interest, the executive team and I have done 8 quite big sessions through the organisation. We've had in excess of 3,000 staff attend those, and that's been about messaging, direction and priorities in pursuit of the outcomes that you've established, and that has, I think, landed pretty well. You are aware, and I suppose this relates somewhat to comments in the previous item, you're aware that we're working on some matters to do with CCOs in order that there's a body of advice ready in due course for yourself and for the Mayor's office. I won't say too much about that here other than to offer to any councillors, if you wish to have discussions regarding CCO matters in the future, then between Max and myself, we'd be very pleased to discuss that with you as we form up a body of advice, and we'll have some other engagement with you collectively as well, as the Mayor has just indicated. 2 other areas in terms of government relations, and I'm just flying through this at a very high level. You know, and perhaps there can be other discussions at a different point, but you know, I do record that there are active discussions around the transport space with Ministry of Transport per your direction, and working with the Mayor and his office in that regard. Likewise, in terms of some of the legislative changes, that dialogue continues. I won't make predictions, but I feel that things are in a constructive space in that regard. The water legislation has been progressed, and you'll note the advent of a framework being released around city deals, which makes good reading if you haven't looked at that. Our view at this point in time, I can tell you, is that while we wait for clarity about which 5 regions are going to be prioritised by government in terms of that discussion, inviting proposals from us. We're just going to carry on in the expectation that we may or should be on that list in order that we're best prepared in due course. Look, the final thing I'll mention, and this is again in lieu of a specific report on recovery activity, I'll cover a few facts to give you a sense of progress in that regard, noting that I think either next month or the month after we'll be at the quarterly, we're committed to do a fulsome quarterly report on recovery progress. So I'm just giving you the headlines now. We're now at a point where 512 buyout offers have either been made or have been executed. Okay, that breaks down as 295 offers are sitting out there with affected homeowners, and 217, you are now the proud owners of 217 damaged properties. That means that the demolition, the deconstruction and the removal phase is quite live. Only 16 deconstructed at this stage, but that's not the full picture in terms of activity in that regard. It's also pleasing, I think you're aware of this, but we have confirmation of government's contribution to some of the 2C projects, specifically two in Mangere and in Muriwai. So those are progressing well. I do acknowledge, special note here, I do acknowledge the Cyclone Recovery Unit has provided an additional $4.98 million in capacity funding to support some of this work that is happening. So, credit to that government agency in terms of their ongoing support alongside the substantive funding for the buyouts and the 2C projects. Very finally, I've been asked to mention, so that it's on your radar, we set out with, post buying these properties, we set out to minimise waste and to use a deconstruction methodology where as much material could be recycled and as many homes as possible could be transplanted into a safe location. So the team are discovering that the cost of deconstruction activity is above what we had estimated. Okay, so it will call into question the balance between those that we demolish and those that we deconstruct and recycle. Potentially not a great outcome from a waste point of view, but we're going to have to be mindful of the cost. They're doing analysis on that now, and we'll give you some further information in that regard. I think, Your Worship, I will leave my part there and I will hand to Ross. Welcome, Ross.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. So this morning we released the preliminary results for the financial year ended 30 June. It's not the full annual report that will come out at the end of next month. This is the preliminary release via the NZX that shows what the preliminary results were unaudited. It kind of provides a picture of just how the group is doing. The numbers are pretty positive. The preliminary results show a record capital investment for the council group of $3.2 billion for the year. That's almost $500 million more than the previous year, which was a record in itself. So some exceptionally strong capital delivery for the year. That does include $132 million of the buyouts that were completed over that period. The debt was down slightly, about $70 million less than the same time a year ago, and that was because of the benefit of the partial airport share sell down that you agreed through the annual budget. That is offset by capital investment that occurred as planned over that period. The group's operating expenditure was up. It increased 1.2 billion overall year on year. That does include basically recognition of the expected cost of the buyouts, not just the ones that occurred in the year, but all of the future ones as well. So sort of taking that those provisions, non-cash provisions out of the picture, there's about 470 million of sort of core costs increased from the prior year, which is largely driven by inflation and interest and depreciation associated with the capital program, which speaks to the budget challenge that you had to deal with through the annual budget. But you did agree a balanced budget, and part of that was the rates increase, and other parts were year-on-year increases, recovery in public transport revenue, increases in water revenues, etc. So overall, across the group, group revenue was about 500 million higher than last year. So costs were up 470 if you put aside provisions, but then revenue was up by slightly more than that. So overall, it was a good result. There will be, as Phil said, there will be more later in the agenda, more information around the quarterly performance results for the 4 quarters through to 30 June, and the 26th of September we'll report to you the annual report, which will be made available basically the day after that. Other things that have gone on, we had a report to the Revenue, Expenditure and Value Committee last week, I believe it was. We reported on savings, which is all part and parcel of the results for the year. So there was a target that we had defined, 50 million of savings was agreed in the budget, so basically increases on previous year's budgets, previous year's targets, and we more than achieved that. We achieved 60 million, so exceeded the target savings by 10 million. And if you kind of look across the last 3 years, the last 3 years were the first 3 years of the last LTP, and so in the last LTP you set a target of 90 million a year. It was increased with the annual budget, and we kind of exceeded the target in each of those years. So over those 3 years, there was a total savings of 332 million. And I think if you kind of look at that, if you sort of go back to the start of amalgamation, we previously, before that period, talked about 2 billion of cumulative savings, and I think with these things, with continuing that and building on it, you get up to the 3 billion kind of number. If you kind of all of the savings compared to pre-amalgamation budgets. So that is that's the savings. If I talk a little bit around just what happened in July. So we've got all those numbers. You'll see more information to come around the last financial year, but in terms of what's happened over the last month since then. So we've had very strong CapEx delivery through the course of last year. Dipped a little bit in July. Part of that is Auckland Transport coming a bit under budget. Some of that's probably just the phasing of how budgets have been phased, and we'd expect that to reverse a little bit next month. Watercare got off to a little bit of a slow start compared to budget. Some of that is some digital improvement projects, so it's more computer systems rather than pipes. So kind of talking about 80% of budget, 80% CapEx delivery for the first month of the financial year, compared to close to 100 the previous quarters and months. And what have we delivered? So there's been flood recovery repairs and wastewater infrastructure on North Shore. So there's 503 households that had been disconnected and had their permanent connections. The wastewater network had been disrupted by flooding. That's been repaired, and so we've got 503 properties that are now permanently reconnected into the network. We've had the Dunkirk wastewater pump station complete and come into service, and that will reduce wet weather overflows into the Tamaki River. In the transport space, there's been good delivery of some bus stop improvements completed, including on Waiheke, and there's been some key links for the Glen Innes cycleway, a couple of key strategic links into that cycleway from other parts of the transport network completed in July. In terms of operating performance, good performance against budget for July. Across the group, we were about 40 million favourable to budget, so revenue was up a little bit, 11 million higher than budget, which is infrastructure growth charges and some consenting revenue mainly, but higher than budget. And then 30 million less, expenditure was 30 million less than budget. So overall adds up to about 40 million, and that included some lower staff costs across the group, generally sort of unfilled vacancies, so not filling vacancies as fast as planned. And so those are really the results for the year and the month. I'll pass across to Gary for the economic update.
Thank you, Ross. Your Worship, kia ora koutou councillors. At the prior meeting on the 1st of August of Governing Body, I undertook to come back to you with regular updates on the city centre in terms of retail sales and pedestrian counts. We have new data for the month of June for the city centre just available. Retail spending in June this year compared to June last year was down 11% for the city centre and 3% for the region. So that's a continuation of the pattern that we've seen this year, where monthly retail spend in the city centre has been down on last year, and where the city centre has just been a bit more affected by trading conditions than the Auckland region as a whole. This may reflect the mix of what the city centre offers, which is, in terms of retail, a bit more weighted to hospitality, such as the restaurant, bar, accommodation side of things, and perhaps less weighted to the consumable goods, such as grocery. That's relative to the region. And so as such, the city centre is probably a bit more exposed to households that are pulling back on discretionary spending as they manage financial pressures from higher interest rates. Another factor may be out of region visitor spending, as we've got data on guest nights in Auckland, and they're down on 9% down on June last year, in June this year. That decrease comes after reasonably strong guest night numbers in the summer compared to the prior summer. But again, this winter, I guess it's the increasing interest rate pressure on households likely to be a factor there. Just turning to counts of pedestrians, it's a consistent story there. In June this year, compared with June last year, they're down 14% in the city centre. I think factors behind that are likely to be the decrease in visitors from out of region, as I mentioned, as well as the change in resident behaviours in the context of that pullback in household spend. Alongside that picture of the decrease in retail spending, there's new data on retail vacancies in the city centre. And so comparing June this year with 6 months ago in December, the retail vacancy rate is at around 10% in June, compared with 12% in December. So a slight improvement. Of course, that remains higher than pre-pandemic when it was typically 2 to 4%. More generally, if we look through this current stage of the economic cycle, the outlook can be expected to be more positive, as noted in the prior update for the city centre, not only in terms of the cycle, but some of those longer term trends that I mentioned. If we zoom out a little bit, on the 14th of August, many of you would have seen the news. Got quite a bit of attention. The Reserve Bank made its first cut to the official cash rate of 25 basis points, down from 5.5% to 5.25%. It's the first cut since October, since the climb into October 2021. That change has come off the back of new data on weakness throughout the economy and their revised forecasts, and they now have an updated forecast for the official cash rate that has a steady incremental easing until reaching 3% late 2026. And the outlook for inflation is to still fall further, hitting 3% the next quarter, 3.3 at the moment. So that change and then the revised outlook, I think, will be welcomed by households who have increasing purchasing power. That will eventually translate into increased consumption and spending and custom, particularly for retail and hospitality, although that will take some time. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Councillor Turner has a question, followed by a few others.
Sorry, my question was of the Chief Executive, when he just gave an update on the recovery. Is there any movement or new information regarding the road reserves, the areas, of sort of no man's land that people are trapped with the movement on their driveways, etc.? We had a briefing about that. There was.
Councillor, I haven't got any further information in front of me. I'm aware that we clarified Council's position in terms of cost liability for those driveways across reserves, but beyond that, no, I don't have anything in front of me, and I can pick it up with you after this if that's useful.
Yes, I was unaware we'd set those cross liabilities. I'll thank you.
Okay, Lazarus, Councillor Sayers.
Thanks. Two questions for finance and one for you, Phil. Just so, if inflation's running at 3.3, how I'm just wondering, how, what's the prediction for the next financial year? Have we got any, is it going to stay the same or perhaps drop? Wow.
Councillor, so we're expecting to move below 3% the next quarter, and then further lower, start, the final quarter of this year and into next year. So into that range of 1 to 3%, which is moving towards the midpoint. But in terms of the specific numbers quarter by quarter, I can look them up in a moment if you're after them, but
Okay.
the direction is downward. I guess there's uncertainty over the pace of that still. Yeah.
Well,
I'll
thank
just-
you for, if you could forward me that, that'd be helpful
Do that
just to
straight,
have.
yes.
The other one, the cost savings, congratulations, that 50 million actually delivered 60, so you got off to a 10 million head start for this year. But just confirming for this coming financial year, 24-25, what the savings are. I don't know if you want to answer that, Phil, through finance, but what's the target that you have to deliver, or the CEO has to deliver in terms of total cost savings? And related to that, is whatever that number is that the, well, perhaps if I could get that figure first.
So I can answer that. So the fact that we've achieved more savings than expected last financial year, that just means we've got a little bit less debt. So we're starting the year with a bit less debt, which means a little bit less interest cost. In terms of savings going forward, there's a 50 million target included in the long-term plan projections. That was increased so at the final stage when you set budgets, and that's an extra $28 million for next financial year. Of that 50 million target that we had sort of in the base, some of those things are savings we've achieved by the savings we found this year, and they carry on and are enduring, but some of their savings we've achieved are one-off, and so we've got to find, of that 50 million for next year, there's about 15 million that we'll need to find permanent ongoing savings. So the net unresolved amount that we need to find is the 15 million of this 50 that's sitting there, plus this additional 28. So it's really 43 million is the outstanding amount that we need to target and find, and that will then take us up to achieving the 50 million plus the 28. So it's it's a 78 target, and we've got 43 million to find at this point.
Okay,
And,
so
and rising again in the year after and the year after that.
thanks,
Correct.
Phil. So if I just take that 78 million figure, because that seems to be for apples compared to this past year, is that the largest, since the formation of the super city, is that the largest ask in terms of cost savings we've requested of the chief executive?
It's the largest in the sense that each year you've increased it, and it builds on top of, each year builds on top of the other. So it's sort of, this is an increase, and it's the largest. It's not necessarily the largest increase. We had, in the emergency budget when COVID hit, we had a really large savings target, and we pulled some levers that were really tough and one-off and quite extraordinary. But we wouldn't recommend doing that outside an emergency situation. So this is not necessarily the biggest jump, but because it builds on everything we've done to date, it takes it to the largest overall total cumulative saving we need to find.
Over what, like a 3-year period, or?
Well, no, each year.
Each year.
Yeah, each year since the start of the Auckland Council, we've added more savings and then more and more. So it's
Right,
kind of
okay.
builds on top.
Great, all right. And okay, the one for you, Phil, is around the recovery office. When you just
I think I'm under enough pressure from the last question.
yeah, mate. Yeah. Well, that's good. You're rise to it, I'm sure. The recovery office question is around the. We're doing well. The recovery office is doing its job. It's going through, but this is all uncharted territory. We're still learning as an organisation as we go, and there may be things that councillors and local board members are becoming aware of in terms of feedback that they could give to the recovery office in terms of potential ways of improving the process. So my question is around, what's the best way to present that to the organisation? Do we have individuals approach the recovery office manager? Do we have community groups do that? Or do councillors correlate that and feed it to you, Phil, for your consideration in terms of, ways that the process may be improved and the experience for the people that are still waiting for resolution.
Yeah, look, in simple terms, we can do that in whatever way works best for you. You're very welcome to give feedback directly to me, write to me, or just, sit down and have a chat. Mace Ward and now Craig Hobbs, working with Mace for the next period of time, would make the same offer. So, that's good. I think I would observe that we're clearly coming up to a point where we're going to have to, review the whole experience and document what learnings we've had from it. And we'll put some formal process around that. At the moment, I don't want the recovery team to have to worry about that. They're sort of head down, full on into this, just crunching through all of the buyouts and what have you, and that probably, you would agree, I'm sure, should be their priority. And then when we're through the bulk of that, we'll have time to do a bit of that reflection. I think they're really, not to prolong this too much, but, that's going to be really important. Aside from progressing all of the recovery activity, now, the second thing that most worries me, frankly, is what does this look like if a similar event happens again, and what's the understanding with government and with insurers and what have you going to look like? That's the thing we've really got to pause and understand, not just as Auckland, but frankly at a national level going forward. So we're coming up to a point where there's going to have to be a really deep reflection on the whole experience, frankly.
If I may, through the chair, thanks, Phil. And that's all very important. What I'd like to just signal is that I'd like to take up the offer of perhaps taking on the responsibility of correlating some, because some of this is live, it's happening right now. Get some thoughts together and perhaps arrange that meeting with you, and you might like Mace at it. But there is some feedback that I could bring into concise form that might be helpful at this very stage. So thank you for your openness to consider it.
Yeah, it's very welcome.
Thank you for that. They're good points that you raised about that. I've already had a chat to the Chief Executive about the deconstruction stuff, and if anyone else is interested in joining me, I've got some experience in this, but I want to make sure we're going about that because it is uncharted territory for our staff, and there are some good ideas about how, and we're learning already that it's running a bit over budget. So I'm going to stick my oar in there. If anyone wants to join me, ring up. The next person is Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. Phil, I had the opportunity earlier this week at the Performance and Appointments Committee of congratulating you on the success I found in the restructure and the enormous efforts you've gone to have visibility to all of the staff of Auckland Council. So I don't need to repeat all of that. And I think that there really is a sense of confidence I'm feeling in the way that the organisation is moving forward. So to that end, I'm happy to move or second the recommendations. The concern I've got, and it follows on from Greg, we're coming now towards the end of September, and yet in the ward that Julie and I represent, in Albert Eden Puketapapa, there are still people who do not know that they will need to register for buyouts by the end of September, and that they're working in complete ignorance to this. And I'm sure I speak for Julie as well, that you're talking to them on a daily basis. Is there a little bit more work by way of communication that we can get out on this? It really does concern me that there's going to be howls of protest, after the end of September by people who are only really just coming up to speed with what's going on. And I also like the idea that Greg had about collating some of the stuff so that, I know that we're all individually contacting Mace or Craig, but somehow if we could find a better mechanism for conveying some of that concern. But are you worried about the end of September coming up and not necessarily having everyone aware of this that may fall into that category?
Yes, in a word. I can imagine that we will have situations like that. I think, however, and it was remiss of me not to mention this, to be honest, but the team are sort of very active in this space at the moment with some communication efforts to try and minimise the chances that people fall between the cracks. I have a couple of notes here about that actually, and in the last month there's been 75 additional properties opt-in, basically directly as a consequence of that communication effort. So it's still coming along now. There's a second round of mail-outs happening right now, bringing people's attention to it, and there is actually door-to-door knocking to go round affected areas, as well as some targeted there's some targeted efforts around those community organisations and those representative groups that have been working in areas advocating on behalf of affected people. So it's a multi-pronged attack to try and really ramp up the communications and make sure that as many people are opted in before the end of September cut-off as possible. Pleased about that. Am I still nevertheless a little worried? Yes, to be honest. That would probably be true regardless of what when exactly the deadline was.
Anyway, I'm well pleased with your performance, and I'm very grateful that the restructuring was handled in such a way, and there was a level of professionalism and dignity through a period of uncertainty. So well done to you for that, and as I say, I'm happy to move or second recommendations if it's required.
Councillor Simpson, please. Deputy Mayor Simpson, my humble apologies.
Thanks, Mayor. At the vague hope that some media person might listen to my question, which I know the answer for, I will ask it anyway. So Ross, am I correct in hearing you say that since amalgamation, and I know this because I spoke at a breakfast that Councillor Hills was with me earlier in the week, and I did the math, got you to help me, so I know the answer. Is it true that Council has, over its pretty much its 14 years, saved in round numbers about $3 billion, which is, in other words, it's operating approximately $3 billion less than the former councils did independently?
Yes, that's probably correct. So what that really means is that if you look at the amalgamated budget projections, the path of the cost projections of the amalgamated councils, add it all up, from their long-term plans at the time, and look at what was the annual costs, and you look at what is the cost. We've taken a few years ago, we calculated it was about 300 million less per annum, and then we've taken 90 and then another 30 out. So you kind of look compared to that sort of cost, the cost of delivering services as it was projected when the council start and what the actual costs are now, it's about $3 billion less. So that's about $3 billion less. That's cumulative over those 14 years. $3 billion less rates would have to collect to deliver the same services because of all the efficiencies and savings we've found.
Thanks. I'd just like to share some good news every now and again.
Good on you. Councillor Ferry, please.
Kia ora, thank you. So I have two questions, just picking up on the recovery theme, and yes, definitely still getting a lot of contact from constituents concerned about that. In terms of the property categorisation, there's also a lot of interest in the rebuild work now as well, and it was very good to be out in Mangere the other night with Alf to hear about the first of the two resilience projects happening out there through the Ordering Council. But I did note, I had written down in my notebook for a while now that we were getting a report, I think, from the Auditor General's Office on recovery progress. that it doesn't get made public for like another month. But I just wanted to check in, have we had that yet? Is that in train?
Yeah, the report from the Auditor General's office is not so much on recovery, but on emergency preparedness.
Okay.
It was an assessment really of how well we've done implementing the review findings from last year from Mike Bush and others. We are in possession of a draft. By their rules, not ours, that's got to be treated in confidence.
Yes.
And we're expecting it to be tabled in Parliament, which is the Auditor General's process next month.
Right, thank you. And the other question is just around the timeframes around the Legacy Fund. Our next item, I think it is about the Future Fund, but just noting that one of the things in that LTP discussion was the establishment of the Legacy Fund. When are we likely to see that progress in terms of obviously the former Auckland City and Manukau City local board areas being able to potentially apply for project support? Do we have a time frame on when that's likely to start to be socialised?
So we've had staff, look at a process around that, how that might work. Also looking at, from what we've heard from local boards and looking through local board plans and, and some of the discussions that we had at the time of the LTP, sort of gathering up a list of what some of the potential candidates might be, and we're figuring out what the process might be and criteria. So we're kind of working through that, and we'll come through with advice. One sort of caveat around that is, that legacy fund is based off the future fund being established,
Yes.
airport shares being transacted and achieving benefits from 1 January next year.
Yep.
So it's all conditional on that actually occurring and the benefits being realised. So we need to make sure we can actually have the benefits to pay for it before we sort of make firm commitments. But the next item will give you an update on how that whole process is going.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one. Just for you, Gary, in terms of city centre retail spending, just wondering if we've got data behind that and things like type of spend, even things like days of the week, because there you can kind of build a picture on how people are using the city centre before we jump to solutions.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. We do have a breakdown in terms of high-level categories of consumables, durables, hospitality, and it is available, I think, on a daily basis, although that might cost a bit more. I'd have to see whether that's available, but we tend to look at it on a monthly basis. It's just a sort of a cost-benefit trade-off, if you will, in terms of it's enough to tell us roughly the direction.
Cool, thanks. If you've got anything lying around, I'd love to have a bit of a look. Thank you, Mr.
Get that to you. Yeah.
Councillor Williamson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My questions follow on from Councillor Henderson's. You mentioned things like 14%, Gary, you mentioned 14% drop in foot traffic. Is that over a 12-month or a quarter?
Thank you, Councillor. That's comparing June this year
June with June
last year.
Okay. Yes. I couldn't find, now I'm hopeless trying to work my way around Nexus. It's not on the briefing papers as far as I can see. Are you planning to give us a copy of what you read out? Because some of those figures were really interesting. And more importantly, I want to see if I can get a comparison with things like retail spend and foot traffic of the CBD with something like, say, Newmarket or Sylvia Park, because I don't think they're down anywhere near as bad as the CBD is.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you're 2 points there. The first one, yes, I would like to include that as you requested in the monthly report, and that'll be available next month. This month, the timing of the data being available with this meeting when it's being held just didn't...
Can you not send out what
I can give you those notes.
Yeah, just read out the notes, that'll be fine.
Yep. Secondly, you did make a good point that the city centre is relatively more affected. I think it's for 2 reasons, as I mentioned. One is that it's more sensitive to changes in out-of-region visitors who would tend to spend more time in the city centre itself than in other town centres, and we know that they're down.
Hospo.
And the other side of it is the hospo. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd really like a copy. Those numbers are really useful, and I couldn't find them anywhere. But I can't find my way around Nexus. So.
Centrix has a lot of that stuff if you want to. Councillor Walker.
Just following on from those figures, I mean, a 14% reduction for somebody in retail or the like, can be as much as catastrophic, given that I would suggest many of the businesses in the centre city are already having difficulty. I would assume that Auckland Council has been impacted. I mean, we've got the Aotea Centre, the Civic, the Town Hall. We have a significant investment across the Civic Centre. And we've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decade that myself and other councillors have presided over into the CBD in the expectation that we would be rewarded. A colossal amount of money was spent, for example, in the lead up to the America's Cup, which obviously didn't go anything as far as COVID was concerned, but nevertheless, it was a huge investment. And we received all sorts of reports on what this would do in terms of ancillary effects. So from our perspective, this is an absolute crisis. And the question that I would ask is, what are we going to do about it? Where is the project team that is assembled to turn this around? Where is the marketing campaign that we're putting in place in association with city businesses and the like, given that we, I would suggest, have some responsibility for this in terms of the catastrophic impact on transport, and will the time of use charging be the death knell? Is that the way we're going to finish the centre city off? So these are very real questions, and for the people that have invested in the centre city, the answers to these must be of real concern. And I see that there's a big high rise that's not going anywhere. I mean, there may be underlying reasons behind that, but this is a crisis. So I don't know what you're doing in terms of leadership, Mr. Mayor, to do something about this, or the Chief Executive, but there's some urgency, because once businesses make a call to go, and fortunately that's been somewhat avoided by Smith & Coe's, many of those businesses may be gone for good. So just a general question as to what we're doing around this. Thank you.
Anyone prepared to answer that? I mean, it's pretty complex. We've got movements of large shopping malls that are not in the city. We've got places like, if you look at Reed Centrics, you'll see that places like Otahu are actually increasing their sales because, you know, downturn, people go to the cheaper places to buy. It's very complex. And there's no guarantee that spending money in an area will return that. I mean, Costco didn't go to the city, they went out to the west because that's where they see the future growth. So it's very complex. And it's everywhere. There are restaurants shutting along.
So do we have any team that's working on this? We have a team that's working on this?
What's the team to do? I'll ask the Chief Executive that. I don't know the answer, but is it our responsibility to keep every business open in the city? I don't know.
The short answer is yes, we do have a cross-boundary team focused on city centre issues, led practically by Simon Oddie out of Eke Panuku, and it has a number of dimensions, including liaison with the stakeholder groups, Heart of the City, City Centre Advisory Panel and such like. There is an additional effort underway around coordination of the physical works that are happening in different locations, and that's been a theme in previous conversations. I think I'll leave it there, but happy to pick up the discussion afterwards with you, Councillor.
The other question I've got just goes to the possible demolition and non-recovery of a number of these assets that we've required, houses, for example. And I pick up on the comment that was made that under a council model, recovery may not be worthwhile. Having said that, there are other models where you work with community groups and the like to demolish, repurpose, and so on. Are we actively seeking that? Because otherwise, I'm sure we're going to get some pretty bad publicity when people see all these houses that they would regard as having some worth trashed. And it would be a very bad look. And I know there are organisations out there that would be interested. Are we actively working with them? Thank you.
It's under review, as I mentioned, by the Recovery Office right now. There will be situations where what you're suggesting isn't wise or possible. They are finding, in a number of instances, asbestos, which is complicating the situation markedly, but your general point is taken, Councillor.
Thank you for that question. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Probably it's just a question because I know that with City Centre we kind of hyper-focus without seeing the bigger picture. So, I mean, Gary, the figures I understand are down across New Zealand around the same, and then Auckland around the same as Auckland City Centre for retail and hospitality spending because there's a recession on. And then I guess the other thing, last year I think, is it correct that GDP in the city centre was 4 times what the rest of the country was? So we're looking at a downturn because the country is in recession. Is that part of the issue?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, it's a fair point to say it is a bit of a downturn across the economy at the moment, and of course, as I mentioned, the city centre feels that a bit more because it's a bit more exposed to that pullback in discretionary spend because of its mix of offerings, which are more weighted to the hospitality and accommodation side of things than the region as a whole. And so there's that element. And as I've mentioned, you have to look at this near-term picture in the context of, I guess, the turbulence through the pandemic period, and the city centre's been exposed to that. But then also, as mentioned last time, briefed you on this, we can look through this stage of the cycle to think about some of those longer-term trends that should be positive for the city centre in terms of growth, the trend towards a service-based economy, the connectivity from the new rapid transit stations, and of course we can see signs of that in terms of the private sector investment, the announced and consented projects. There's quite a decent pipeline there.
Yeah, thank you. With the with adding the Chow Brothers and the precincts, 600 homes they're going to build on the McDonald's, plus a few other things that have popped up recently. Is it around? It was about $5 billion of investment underway. Is it about 6 now, or are we heading towards in the city centre, private investment?
Thank you, Councillor. There are different estimates. We can get you one after this meeting. We tend to think about it in terms of floor area that's been consented or announced, and looking at that in terms of commercial and residential, and so we can get those numbers to you too.
Yeah, I think commercial was about 300,000 square metres on the way. Just on the debt question, the savings question. Obviously the public go, you've saved 3 billion, but how come my rates didn't drop? Is it correct in saying that the main thing we do when we save is try and increase the spend on capital? Is that my understanding? Like obviously we are seeing those massive increases in our capital spending, but that's where most of the savings go to try and increase that.
So it's true that the cost base is increasing with inflation, and it increases because of the capital program in terms of higher interest and depreciation. It's also true that if we hadn't found all those savings, we'd still have those pressures, plus we wouldn't have had all this extra cost we've taken out. So rates will have to be increasing at the same rate, but off a higher base. So people will be paying much higher rates because we haven't achieved those savings. Plus, you'd still have the increases every year to deal with these trends.
And 2 very last questions for Phil. One on staff morale. So I'm hearing post the restructure, people are moving forward, and you've been doing those really good sessions where they feel, and I've spoken at one recently as well. So morale, and then the other one is around the Recovery Office. I know that I keep getting emails back from Mace and others around capacity to get people the information. I've got quite a few people who get like a letter saying you'll get your category in May, then it goes June, then it goes August, and I think some of that is about communication. Are you hearing anything about how we can improve that? Like people, I know we've pushed for outside engineers or whoever to do the work, but can we improve how we are working with people who keep getting the timeline move?
Look, I probably haven't got a very adequate answer for you right now. I can talk further. I know that I know this has been a frustration, and I know that Mason and the team have been working on trying to make sure that people get, at least sort of a level of under promise and over deliver with a little bit more certainty. And those shifting timeframes have been a frustration. So they've been working on it, but I can't update you now. On the morale question, I mean, what we have in terms of measurement is regular engagement surveys, and there's one of those coming up shortly, so we'll get a more scientific take on it, than my vague sense of the vibe in the organisation.
Thank you.
Councillor Turner has a question.
Thank you. Just going back to recovery, Mr. Chief Executive, is Auckland Transport's recovery process and funding connected directly with council? Are we joined at the hip, or is it two separate entities?
There were, for aspects of the transport recovery, there was some dedicated money within the overall envelope. So separate in one sense, but very connected in another, with transport doing their recovery activity in concert with the recovery office and with people embedded in there to ensure coordination. So.
With that answer, it's Councillor Lee has a question. Councillor Bartley has a question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the 103 million higher due to IGCs. Did we expect that or no? And then is there a correlation between that and the infrastructure that we're delivering, or is it just we're collecting the money but we haven't delivered the infrastructure yet?
So in terms of what we expected, so we budgeted and planned on an increase in IGCs in the budget, and what we've seen, throughout every month of the past year, it's done better than expected. So we planned for an increase, but it's been stronger than that. The IGCs are based off Watercare's planned capital investment, so it's sort of over a 10-year view of what is their growth capex. So, some of it might be related to growth capex they've done in the past, stuff they're planning to do in the future, so a bit of a mix of both of those things. And through the long-term plan, you ask them to have a look at their IGCs and can they look at that pricing and make sure they're collecting a fair amount through that mechanism. And so there has been some change in movement, agreed as part of the LTP, and they have moved those charges upwards.
Councillor Foley, please.
Kia ora, thank you, and bless you, Your Worship. Thanks, team, for the report. I'm just following on from Councillor Ferry's question, but also from my question maybe 2 governing bodies ago around the Fix It, Finish It Legacy Fund. I'm just really mindful, I recently had a catch-up with the local boards and with Eke Pānuku, and they were asking me about the process, and I know I've been asking the Mayor's office and everybody else about the process. So can I just ask whether you are keeping the local boards up to date? Are you keeping them in the loop about what's happening with that process and the timeframes as well? And can I ask you to keep me in the loop as well? Because I haven't had, although, in talking, I haven't had a response officially in any way, no email or anything like that. And then for those boards that do actually have plans ready to go, for example, the Manukau Sports Bowl, they have the master plan already completed, designs and everything else ready to go. Phase 2 of the Māngere Otahu David Longi playground, ready to go. As a first step, can they send that as a bid to somebody or to somewhere in council, just as a first step to sort of get the cab off the rank, so to speak? Kia ora.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure what communication has gone to local boards to date, but we'll make sure that we get some good communications out to yourselves and local boards around the process, the timing, what kind of information we require from a bid, and when some of that stuff can come through. So I think we can, people have been doing some work on the process. We can get that out pretty soon, I think. in terms of, confirming funding. Some of that will be depending on, whether, the future fund is set up and the benefits are there. But we can kind of give clarity on the process and then get the process underway to just show that, show everyone that things are progressing.
Okay, that seems to be the end of the questions. Please withdraw and we will have a discussion.
You were, just councillors, I've got to go to another meeting, so I shall return, as MacArthur said, and Max will say.
Okay, Councillor Philly wants to make a comment now. Good on you.
It's okay, Chair, I pretty much did it then, so that's all good. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. Filipina?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I just wanted to highlight, and this is from a regional perspective, but I want to highlight an event that was held at Ngāti Otara Park. City Care, through Taryn's team, Taryn crew, ended up negotiating the contract with City Care, and part of the negotiation was for a subcontractor to give their contract to Ngāti Otara Park, and that ended up having the locals at Ngāti Otara, at Otara, and both Councillor Fully and I and Councillor Dalton was there, and it allowed the people of Otara to do the cleaning around the toilets, the changing rooms, and also the rubbish, because the money was going back to those people in Otara instead of going to the subcontractors. I know it happens in Manurewa. I don't know if it happens around here, but having the ability for local people to do that and take it off the subcontractors, which they approved, is something that I think needs to be looked at around the region, because it does employ our people within that local board area. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and that was as a result of what they ended up negotiating with Taryn Crew and City Care. So just want to acknowledge it. That was
well done,
that happened in June.
Very good. Good news. Very good. Okay, it's been proposed and seconded, I believe.
Yep.
All those in favour of receiving the Chief Executive's report, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary. Carried. Okay, we're going to move to something which is quite exciting now, which is item 15, the Auckland Future Fund. This item is the first progress update on the establishment of the Auckland Future Fund. I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Fletcher and the leadership she has shown since we agreed to establish the fund. I know that Ross and John and team are here to update it.